So if you have made it this far, thank you very much. This has been a relatively long journey to get here. This has been just a fun exercise. So how can you potentially prioritize and organize your work as a product manager? There are many ways out there. There are some ways that are better than others. So now what I want to do is a little bit try to see what journey you could have followed and see how you have done and potentially which other paths you could have taken. If you don't want to ruin the experience, maybe you want to start again and see what other paths you could actually follow in order to get to the end of this story. But now what we are going to go is a little bit through the different paths, how they break down, what are my thoughts on which ones are the ones that I think that it would make sense most to follow compared to the other ones. So basically when we started the PM game, we start kind of with a problem. The problem is that there's a customer that is coming with a potential solution for a problem, like even a very properly documented solution for that problem. In this one, there is already two alternatives here. So the first one is that, so we can take that feature request from the customer as well defined as it is, and we move forward trying to start to plan what it is. The other option is that we actually go ahead and do a customer research, that we try to dig in more into the problem, that we try to identify if this problem is actually something that is a more common problem, if it aligns with what we try to do in the company or not. What do I think of these two options? So preferably, I would take the second option, mainly because you have to understand first what is the potential impact of a problem, how big it is, how critical it is, how much potential business there is for the company in doing this product. We had to remember as product managers that we typically work in for-profit companies, and of course companies are made because of a vision of solving a specific problem, but of course to get there all the companies need money to run. That means usually it's translated into sales, subscriptions, whatever it is exactly in the different companies can be slightly different, but in the end it's some kind of revenue. And it's something that we also had to take into account as product managers. How can we generate the biggest impact for our business? That's the reality of the world that we're living. Why the first one? Why I wouldn't pick the first one? First of all, the customer solution is not always the solution that you necessarily had to implement. Most of the cases, the customer solution is not necessarily the correct one because they are not familiar with your product. So what you had to do as product manager is that you had to understand the requirements that a customer has, so the actual underlying problem, and from there you can start working. Trying to just take a solution and implement it, usually it can end up, or it can have quite many potential problems. Because first of all, design-wise, might not be thought out properly for the rest of the product. It's just adding a new button or adding a new option. It's not always as straightforward as it sounds, especially if you have thousands or tens of thousands, even millions of users out there. If you go that way, there is no way that you are going to keep a coherent design across your product. So you have to make sure that you are able to understand the root cause, and then you are able to plan everything according to what are the principles of your product. Let's move to the second layer. When we took the path of moving forward with the customer request as it is, so if we take the first path, one of the first alternatives was to right away move into execution. For some of you, this might sound like crazy, that there's no way that you should do this. There's quite many people out there that still work this way. The reality of this case is that many companies, what they do is that they just take a customer request and they just understand what they're asking, they go ahead and start implementing it. At this moment, a product manager is not acting anymore realistically as a product manager, it's acting more like a project manager, getting some kind of request from somewhere. It can be directly from the customer, sometimes sales, sometimes other teams, and just start executing on it and making sure that that project is actually delivered to the customers. The other option here was trying to plan or understand better the problem and then come up with some kind of plan of what the potential solution could be, and then try to get a little bit of feedback in this plan. So if you are following this initial path, if you are actually looking and taking directly the customer request At least here you are looking into trying to validate the potential alternative. You might do this sentence even including other customers, not just the initial one. So trying to identify also if this is a common problem for others. So at least even if you are taking the customer request, you are trying to look if this is a general problem for others. So out of these two, I would say choose the second path. Here we have tried to get feedback from our customers, tried to get feedback on the approach. And then we had two different solutions or two different possibilities. One of them is that we tried to do a little bit of a design thinking process. It's not entirely design thinking given that we are already working with a customer solution, but you can try to still involve customers as much as possible and see if you can build a solution that is generic and that it actually helps those users and that they find value in this solution. And the other one is that, hey, you talk with the customers, you got feedback on the approach, you take that feedback that they have given you and potentially adapt your plans according to that feedback. Out of these solutions, I would choose the first one. I would try to still involve the customers as much as possible to try to make sure that what you are building is something that is valuable for them and is something that is also usable and that they like to use, so that you also take the design part into account. The second one is not going to be very optimal because in the end, yes, you are at the updating a little bit your plans, but you are still not doing the work and the research that should come when you are actually trying to plan something for your product. So you have decided to move forward and do something similar to design thinking in your process, being able to involve your customers while you are developing, validate your ideas, share prototypes with them, get their input, and understand better the problems that they have. This is in general, a quite good approach to work and drive execution through, so that you are actually driving your development, your implementation part together with the users and validating the solutions that you're building with them. So here we talked that we had two alternatives. So first of all was that we want to publish as soon as possible, and then the second one is that we want to try an A/B testing. So here there's differences in these two. Sometimes companies or some people think that you have to push as soon as possible the product or the feature to everybody and start getting feedback on it, adapt and improve. It's a little bit what design thinking is doing, but just that you release to a wider audience. When you do A/B testing, you want to be more careful. You want to first release to a certain type of customers, analyze their behavior, see if they're using the feature, are they getting value out of it? Are they getting lost with it? And then depending on those results, you might have to modify something, or you can actually go ahead and publish to everybody else. Which one would I take here? This is kind of a tricky one, and it depends a lot on what kind of products are you producing. So if you are in SaaS, more typically, you probably want to go to something like A/B testing. If you are delivering apps, most likely, and most of the companies are going to go more of a go ahead and release to everybody. So it depends a little bit on what kind of segment you are or what kind of product you have. You might want to take one approach or another. Potentially my point of view here is that if you don't have a very big amount of customers, potentially the first approach could be okay. The A/B testing has a ton of advantages when you have a large customer set. It can be very risky. Think about Google, think about Facebook. Think what happened to Facebook recently with their outage. If you release to everybody at the same time, probably the problem with Facebook was not related to this though. You don't want that something that potentially is not completely working or is not fully tested goes out there to everybody, because there might be millions of users. So you want to be very careful how do you release. You might have test markets or test segments that you have a certain type of users or certain type of geographies where you release first, get feedback, and then move on. There is different alternatives, and this is something that you had to evaluate depending on the product and depending on the size of the company. So when you move to product execution, here we were with a happy case that there's no problems, that execution goes fine, engineering teams don't have big issues, the feature was relatively easy to implement, and then you get faced by two choices, which is similar to the previous one that I just explained, which is, do you want to do A/B testing or do you want to go ahead and release to everybody else? One of the things that comes after the A/B testing, and that potentially you can do also, and you should do it anyhow, is to do success metrics. You would like to make sure that once you release a feature, you are able to see that people are using it, that people are finding it valuable. It is still a very common problem out there in companies that they don't follow up and they don't track on the development that they do. They just release features and hope for the best. And nobody knows if it has been successful, if it has been adopted by users, what has happened. So it's good to have success metrics always whenever you release a feature to your public, to your customers. So you are able to understand what is the value that they are getting. And if they're not getting value, how can you improve it? So this is always a very important thing for a product manager to be able to understand the data and the underlying data on what is available. So now you had decided to go ahead and do customer research, and here I could have added another one, but it was starting to be quite long. Beware, it's the first time that I'm doing this kind of video set. I decided not to include data analysis. So of course, data analysis and understanding the underlying data, is this a real problem or not, understanding that, researching also from the data that you have available is very important. Once you understand better, is this a real problem? Once you identify it better, how do you move forward? So again, here you can go ahead and move forward and start executing and planning your solution, being able to deliver something to your customers. And the other option is that you can go ahead and try to identify or analyze first, before going into any further research, does this solution align with my vision as a company and with my strategies? As a company, you had to have some kind of a strategy and vision. And this is something that is very important, that you are able to see that the problem that has been identified is aligning with what we want to achieve in our product. So from my point of view, out of these two options, I wouldn't take the first one, because then again, you kind of validate a little bit the problem, but then you don't go ahead and do maybe a potential better research, that you are not even looking if this actually is aligning to my vision. My customer could be asking for something that is in completely a different direction from whatever I want to go as a company. I would anyways choose be researching that or analyzing if this is something that aligns with what we want to achieve as a company. Does this affect or does this touch on some of our key strategies as a company? Moving forward, of course, is as part of the strategy. Typically that happens, and as people put it as a separate thing, is that who are the user personas that this is affecting to? First of all, we want to understand who are the user personas that are affected. And of course, part of our strategy should be that we have defined who are the user personas that we are targeting as our potential customers. I understand now that this is something that affects my customers, the user personas that I define, it aligns with my strategy, and I think that that's for me enough to go ahead and start implementing. Or do I actually want to go ahead and do this together with a customer? Do I want to go and follow the design thinking process? I just defined that one earlier, so please go ahead in the timeline and take a look. Once we are here, again, you will have the different options of how to publish. For example, publishing to everybody as soon as possible and try to get feedback, or being able or deciding to go ahead and do A/B testing. So I explained those ones earlier, so I'm not going to repeat myself. So if you have watched this all the way to the end, I really thank you very much. I would ask you also to bear with me. It's the first time that I do this kind of game in YouTube. I'm not completely sure how this is going to play out. So this is a little bit me testing and prototyping and see how this works. I didn't necessarily validate with anybody, but I actually did research, for example, a lot on what people are doing out there or asking out there in different product management forums. And many people are trying to identify how to get into product management positions. Something like what I did now here with this product management game is pretty much what many companies in tech are doing when they are doing the process or the interview process for product managers. They want to understand if you have some kind of framework and ways of working. So they want to see what is your mental process to analyze a problem and actually work with others. And as I said, this was my first trial. I know that I missed quite many things, like for example, talking with stakeholders, having a proper release plan, analyzing more the underlying data on the potential problem or the potential flaws of the product, and understand that maybe how can I identify or validate the problem that the customers are talking about with the potential available data in the product. In any case, if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you give it a thumbs up. It helps a lot with the product that where we are playing this thing now, which is YouTube and its almighty algorithm. So a thumbs up, a like, a comment is going to always help. If you really like this kind of content, I would also appreciate if you let me know in the comments, and would you like to see more of this type of content? It takes a lot of time to produce, but if it's something that you find it valuable and that you think is interesting, please let me know in the comments, and let me know in the comments about what could be the topics that you think that would be interesting to have another round for this kind of game in the future. I would like to thank again all of you who are still here. I will see you in the next video, and remember, stay safe.